After 45 years of marriage, I learned that a man can kiss your forehead every morning, tell you he loves you over coffee, and then one October afternoon hand you divorce papers with the signature of a woman 37 years younger than him. Bernard took the house. He took the car. He took every dollar we had ever saved together, every retirement account, every investment we had built across nearly 5 decades of what I thought was a shared life. But what Bernard Ashford did not realize as he drove away with Serena Vance sitting in the passenger seat of his new sedan was that he had overlooked the smallest, most forgotten piece of my life, the one thing that would make everything he took meaningless in the end. October wind dragged dry leaves across the driveway as I stood on the front steps of the home I had lived in for 43 years. My thin cardigan pulled tightly around my shoulders, not because of the cold, but because of the strange, hollow feeling spreading through my chest. The kind that comes when something final has already happened, but your mind is not caught up yet. Behind me through the open door, movers carried out the last of the furniture with the detached efficiency of men who had done this 100 times before, never pausing to wonder about the life being dismantled piece by piece. In the driveway, Bernard stood beside his sedan, new, polished, entirely out of place against the aging home we had shared. He checked his watch as if he were late for an appointment rather than ending a marriage of 45 years. 40 years I had worked as a nurse at Hartford General Hospital, 40 years of 12-hour shifts, of holding hands with dying patients, of being the calm presence in moments of crisis. I had retired 10 years ago, thinking Bernard and I would finally travel, finally enjoy the life we had built together. Instead, I had spent those 10 years becoming invisible in my own home. "That is the last of it," one of the movers called out. Bernard gave a short nod. He did not glance toward me as he pulled a folder from under his arm, the same folder that had slowly erased my existence over the past 4 months. Documents, signatures, court stamps, each page stripping something away until there was nothing left to divide. I stepped forward. My voice came out quieter than I expected. "Bernard, this is not right." He sighed, the kind of sigh that carried no anger, no sadness, just impatience. "It is done, Vivian." "The house," I started. He cut me off with a slight shake of his head. "Is legally mine. The judge was very clear. Everything was purchased under my name. You know that." I looked past him at the front door, at the faint outline on the wall where our wedding photo had hung for 4 decades. At the porch railing he had built the summer our daughter was born, the daughter who had died of leukemia at 19, the daughter whose memory lived in every corner of this house. For a moment the memories came rushing in so fast it made me dizzy. Birthday parties, late-night conversations, Catherine practicing piano in the living room, the smell of Christmas dinners, the quiet evenings when Bernard and I would sit on this very porch, saying nothing because we did not need words. All of it. Gone. Bernard's voice snapped me back. "You will need to take what is yours and go." He gestured toward the 2 suitcases sitting near the curb, as if my entire life could be packed into them. "What is mine?" The words caught in my throat. "That is all the court assigned to you." His voice remained flat, clinical. I stared at him, searching his face for something. Regret, hesitation, even a flicker of the man who had held my hand when Catherine took her last breath. But there was nothing there, just a distant calm that made him feel like a stranger wearing my husband's face. 45 years, I whispered. And this is how it ends. He adjusted his cuff as if the conversation were an inconvenience. "You will be fine. There are places you can go, facilities, assisted living. At your age, it might even be better." The word landed heavier than anything else. Facilities. Not homes. Not options. Just somewhere to be placed, like an item that no longer fit where it once belonged. "I do not need a facility. You cannot live alone, Vivian. You are 75 years old. Be realistic. That is not your decision to make anymore." Something in my chest tightened. Not anger, not sadness, but a quiet realization that somewhere along the years, my voice had been reduced to something optional, something easy to ignore. And now at the very end, It had been erased completely. Bernard reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an envelope. He extended it toward me without meeting my gaze. "There is some cash here, enough to get you started somewhere." I looked at his hand. This man had held my hand through labor, through grief, through decades of ordinary days. Now he handed me an envelope like I was a stranger asking for directions. I accepted it with fingers that felt oddly numb. "Started where?" He hesitated for a fraction of a second. "That is up to you." The engine started. He paused at the door, and for a brief moment I thought he might turn around. Instead, he simply said, "Take care of yourself, Vivian." The same tone someone might use with a stranger. Then he drove away without looking back. The car disappeared down the street, leaving behind nothing but exhaust and silence so complete it felt unreal. I remained where I was, standing beside the two suitcases that now represented everything I had left. I had been left with nothing, or at least that is what Bernard believed. Minutes passed, maybe more. Eventually my legs felt too weak to keep standing. I lowered myself onto the edge of the curb, the rough concrete pressing through my skirt, grounding me in a reality I was not ready to accept. The envelope contained $2,000 in cash. I counted it 3 times. $2,000. That was what 45 years of marriage was worth to him. I sat there for a long time, staring at the cracks in the pavement, watching shadows lengthen as afternoon crept toward evening. And then my hand drifted into my handbag, searching for something familiar, something untouched by lawyers and courtrooms. My fingers brushed against something small, cold and solid. I paused, my breath catching as I pulled it out. An old brass key, worn smooth at the edges, its surface dulled by time, but unmistakably real. I stared at it, and as I did, a memory surfaced. Faint at first, then clearer. The smell of pine trees, the sound of wind through leaves. A man's voice calling me in from a wooden porch. The taste of wild blueberries picked from bushes behind a small cabin. The warmth of a fire crackling while snow fell outside. My grandfather's cabin, Silas Ashford. I had not thought about that place in decades. It existed in a part of my memory that felt like someone else's life. I was 10 years old the last time I visited. The summer my parents drove me to Montana to meet my grandfather for the first and only time. He had been a quiet man, a woodworker who lived alone in the mountains outside a small town called Cedarbrook. My father's father. The two of them estranged for reasons no one ever explained. But that summer, something had shifted. For 2 weeks I had lived in his cabin, watched him carve intricate figures from blocks of wood, listened to his stories about the land, learned to identify birds by their songs and plants by their leaves. And then we left, and I never went back. 5 years later, when I was 15, my grandfather died, a heart attack in his sleep. But before he died, he had sent me something, a letter and a key. The letter had been short, written in trembling handwriting. "Dear Vivian, I know we only met once, but I saw something in your eyes that summer. Something that told me you might need a place of your own someday, a place where no one can reach you. Keep this key. The cabin is yours now. One day you will understand why." I was 15 when I received that letter. I had not understood it then. Had not understood why a grandfather I barely knew would leave me his cabin. So I had kept the key, tucked it away, moving it from place to place across the decades without ever really thinking about it. Bernard had never known about the cabin. I had never mentioned it, not because I was hiding it, but because it had seemed irrelevant to our life in Connecticut. And now Bernard had taken everything he could see, but he had forgotten the one thing that was never his to take. I closed my fingers around the key, and something shifted inside me, deep and steady, like the first spark of something that had not been there moments before. For the first time since Bernard's car had disappeared, I lifted my head, my eyes no longer fixed on what I had lost, but on the one thing that might still remain. If you have been watching until now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever held on to something for years, decades even, without knowing why? And then one day, you suddenly understood? Share your story in the comments. Now let us see what Vivian finds when she finally uses that key. The bus station in Hartford was nearly empty when I arrived the next morning. I had spent the night in a budget motel near the highway, the kind that rented rooms by the hour and did not ask questions. The mattress had been thin, the walls thinner, but I had slept more soundly than I had in months, because for the first time in longer than I could remember, I had a direction. The ticket counter clerk was a young woman with tired eyes. "Cedarbrook, Montana," I said, "as close as you can get me." She typed something into her computer, frowned. "That is going to be a long trip, ma'am. 2 transfers, about 53 hours total." "That is fine." She looked at me again, as if waiting for me to change my mind. "You sure about this? There is not much out there. Population 3,000 and something." I smiled. For the first time in days, it felt genuine. "That sounds perfect." The journey across America took 3 days. 3 days of highways stretching toward horizons I had never seen. 3 days of small towns and truck stops and diners with red vinyl booths and coffee that tasted like it had been sitting on the burner since morning. I watched the landscape change through the window. Connecticut gave way to Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania to Ohio, Ohio to Illinois. The cities grew smaller. The spaces between them grew larger. Somewhere past the Mississippi, the land began to open up in ways I had forgotten were possible. Rolling plains, golden in the late autumn light, scattered farms with red barns and white fences, cattle grazing in fields that stretch forever. I had lived my entire adult life in Connecticut, in suburbs where houses stood close together and yards were measured in square feet. I had forgotten what it felt like to see the sky stretch from one horizon to the other. Uninterrupted, endless. Somewhere in Nebraska, an elderly man sat down beside me. He wore a weathered cowboy hat and smelled faintly of tobacco. "Long way from home?" he asked. I thought about the question. "No," I said finally. "I think I am just now heading toward it." The bus dropped me in Billings on the afternoon of the 3rd day. From there, I took a smaller regional bus to Red Lodge. And from Red Lodge, I hired a taxi driven by a woman named Louise, who seemed to know everyone within 100 miles. "Cedarbrook?" Louise said when I told her my destination. "That is way out there. You got family?" "I used to. My grandfather lived there." "Ashford?" She glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "Silas Ashford? You knew him." Everyone knew Silas. Good man. Quiet. Made the most beautiful furniture you ever saw. Donated pieces to the church, the school, the community center. When he passed, felt like the whole town lost something. I did not respond. Just watched the landscape change outside the window. Hills rising, trees thickening, air growing clearer and colder. "He talked about a granddaughter sometimes," Louise continued. "Said she visited once when she was a little girl. Said he hoped she would come back someday." She glanced at me again. "I am guessing that was you." I nodded. Louise smiled warmly. "Well then, welcome home, honey. Took you long enough." The cabin appeared through the trees just before sunset. Louise had dropped me at the end of a dirt road, half swallowed by weeds. The path was still there, still leading somewhere, and at the end of it stood my grandfather's cabin. Smaller than I remembered, but solid. Built from logs that had weathered 60 Montana winters and still stood straight. The porch sagged slightly on one side. A few windows had been boarded up, but it was there, still standing, still waiting. I approached slowly, my suitcases bumping against rocks, my breath visible in the cold air. When I reached the porch steps, I stopped, just stood there for a moment. The same door I had run through as a 10-year-old girl. The same door he had stood in to wave goodbye when my parents drove me away for the last time. I pulled the brass key from my pocket. 60 years I had kept this key. 60 years without ever using it. The lock was stiff, resisting at first, as if testing whether I truly belonged here. But then, with a soft click that seemed louder than it should have been, it turned. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The air was cool and faintly stale, carrying the scent of wood and dust and something familiar that had not entirely faded. Sunlight filtered through small windows, illuminating particles drifting lazily through the air. The furniture was still there, covered in white sheets yellowed with age. The old wooden table standing exactly where I remembered. The small stone fireplace untouched. A stack of neatly arranged logs beside it. And along the walls, shelves filled with books, jars, and small objects. They seemed less like forgotten clutter and more like pieces of a life deliberately left behind. I set my suitcases down by the door and walked further in. My fingers brushed lightly against surfaces, reacquainting myself with something I had once known intimately. "Grandpa," I said under my breath. For a moment, the silence that followed felt almost like an answer. The bedroom at the back was exactly as I remembered. A simple iron bed frame, a quilt folded neatly at the foot. The same quilt my grandfather's wife had made before she died young, and in the corner, a wooden trunk. I knelt slowly in front of it, lifted the lid. Inside, I found notebooks, dozens of them, stacked carefully, each filled with my grandfather's handwriting, recipes, remedies, observations about mountains, plants, and animals, instructions for preserving food through winter, notes on woodworking techniques, and beneath all the notebooks an envelope, yellowed with age, for my granddaughter Vivian, to be opened when you finally come home. My hands shook as I opened it. The letter inside was several pages long, the handwriting growing weaker as it progressed. "My dear Vivian, if you are reading this, it means you have finally found your way here. I always knew you would. I saw it in your eyes that summer when you were 10 years old. That same look your grandmother had when I first met her. The look of someone who would need a place to escape to someday. I do not know what brings you here now. I do not know what you have lost or what you are running from. But I know that whatever it is, you will survive it. Because you are an Ashford, and we do not break. Look under the third floorboard from the fireplace. I left something there for you. Not much, but enough. And in the old horse barn beneath the workbench, you will find my workshop. Everything I ever made is there. Everything I ever was. The cabin is yours now. The land is yours. The life I built here is yours. I wish I could have known you better. I wish your father and I had not been so stubborn. I wish I could have watched you grow up. But life does not always give us what we wish for. It gives us what we need. And I believe, Vivian, that one day you would need this place. So I kept it for you. I love you, granddaughter. I always have, even from a distance. Find your peace here. Build something new, and know that wherever I am proud of you. Your grandfather, Silas." I do not know how long I sat on that dusty floor, holding that letter. Long enough for the light outside to fade completely. Long enough for the cold to seep through my thin clothes. My grandfather had known. 60 years ago, he had looked at a 10-year-old girl and seen her future. Had seen that someday she would need a place to run to. And he had prepared for that day. The third floorboard from the fireplace creaked when I pressed on it. It took effort to pry it up. My fingers were cold and stiff, the wood warped from decades of mountain winters. But eventually it came loose. Beneath it, wrapped in oilcloth, I found a metal box. Inside was money, cash, bundled neatly, $8,500, a fortune to a man who had lived simply in the mountains, a lifetime of savings, set aside for a granddaughter who might never come. But he had believed I would. And finally, after 60 years, I had. Have you ever discovered that someone was watching over you, protecting you, without you ever knowing? Someone who believed in you even when you did not believe in yourself? Tell me about them in the comments. Because sometimes the people who love us most are the ones we never fully see until they are gone. Winter in Montana does not arrive gradually. It comes like a door slamming shut. One day the aspens are gold and the air is crisp. The next the temperature drops 40 degrees and the first snow begins to fall and does not stop for months. I had never experienced cold like that. Not in Connecticut where winters were uncomfortable but manageable. But I learned. I learned because my grandfather's notebooks taught me. Those notebooks became my Bible, my guidebook, my constant companion through those first brutal weeks. He had written everything down. How to start a fire that would last through the night. How to seal windows against drafts. How to ration food when roads became impassable. And he had written about the plants, Hundreds of entries about herbs and berries and roots. Which ones could be eaten? Which ones could heal? Which ones could kill? He had been a woodworker by trade, but a naturalist by passion, and he had poured that knowledge into those notebooks. I read them every night by candlelight, learning to see the land through his eyes. The first person I met in Cedarbrook was Opal Brennan. She ran the general store on Main Street, the only store within 20 miles that sold everything from canned goods to kerosene to winter boots. A woman in her early 50s with silver-streaked hair and the kind of no-nonsense demeanor that came from decades of mountain living. I had walked the 5 miles into town on my third day. The road was still clear then. The bell above the door jingled when I entered. Opal looked up from behind the counter. Her eyes narrowed as she took in my appearance. My expensive but impractical coat, my thin shoes. "You must be the one staying at the Ashford cabin," she said. "Not a question. Word travels fast. Town this small, word travels at the speed of light." She came around the counter. "You are going to freeze to death in that outfit." I was beginning to realize that. She disappeared into the back and emerged with an armful of clothes. Heavy wool sweaters, lined pants, thick-soled boots. "Try these on. We will settle up after." "I do not know if I can afford—" She waved her hand. "Your grandfather paid off a lot of debts in this town, including mine. He built the shelves in this store, built the chairs in the diner, built half the furniture in half the houses in Cedarbrook." She pushed the clothes into my arms. "Consider this the beginning of us paying him back." Opal told me about the town's history while I tried on boots. Cedarbrook had been a logging town once, then a mining town, then nearly a ghost town when both industries collapsed. Now it survived on ranching and tourism and stubborn determination. Silas Ashford had arrived in the 1950s, a young man with a talent for woodworking and preference for solitude. He had bought 40 acres and built his cabin by hand. He was a quiet man, Opal said, kept to himself mostly, but when the town needed something, he was always there. The big blizzard of '77, he housed 3 families in that cabin for 2 weeks. Never asked for anything in return. I did not know that. There is a lot you do not know. Opal handed me coffee from the pot she kept warm behind the counter. "Silas talked about you sometimes. Said he had a granddaughter back east. Said he hoped she would visit again someday." I looked down at my coffee. "I should have come sooner. You are here now." Her voice softened. "That is what matters." The second person I met was Clyde McIntyre. He appeared at my cabin on the 7th day, an old man of 79 with white hair and weathered skin and the kind of quiet confidence that came from a lifetime of hard work. He knocked once, then waited patiently. "Miss Ashford?" His voice was deep, roughened by age but still strong. "Vivian. Just Vivian." He nodded. "I am Clyde McIntyre. I live about 2 miles east of here. Been keeping an eye on this place since your grandfather passed." He looked past me into the cabin. "Silas asked me to, before he died. Asked me to watch the cabin. Said someday his granddaughter might come looking for it." I stared at him. That was 60 years ago. A promise is a promise. I told him I would keep watch until someone came. Someone finally did. He stepped back. "I was a veterinarian, retired now, but I know my way around these mountains better than most. If you need anything, I am just down the road." He turned to leave, then paused. "Your grandfather was a good man, Vivian. One of the best I ever knew." I was glad to keep my promise to him. The days developed a rhythm. I would wake before dawn, start a fire, make coffee in the ancient percolator, then read my grandfather's notebooks until the light was strong enough to work. And there was work, so much work. The cabin needed repairs I did not know how to do. The roof leaked, the windows let in drafts, the porch steps were rotting. But I learned. Clyde came by every few days, taught me which tools to use, which repairs were urgent, how to check the roof for ice dams. He never asked about my past. Never asked why a 75-year-old woman had suddenly appeared in a cabin empty for decades. He simply helped. Opal kept me supplied with food and necessities, refused to let me pay full price, And slowly, day by day, the cabin began to feel less like a forgotten relic and more like a home. It was Opal who first noticed my preserves. I had found recipes in my grandfather's notebooks, instructions for wild berry jams and herb-infused honeys. I had started experimenting. The first batches were failures. Too sweet, too runny, but I kept trying, and eventually I got it right. Opal showed up one afternoon in early November, stood in my kitchen doorway looking at the rows of jars. What is all this? Blackberry jam, wild herb honey, pickled ramps. I handed her a jar, my grandfather's recipes. She opened it, smelled it, tasted. Her eyebrows rose. This is good, Vivian. Really good. Just following his instructions. She looked at me with that calculating look. I have customers who would pay good money for something like this. Tourists mostly. City people who want authentic mountain products. I had not thought of selling them. Maybe you should start. What do you think will happen next? Will Vivian finally find the peace she has been searching for? Or is something else waiting in these mountains? If you have ever had to start over from nothing, I want to hear your story. Leave a comment below and keep watching, because what Vivian discovers next will change everything. The first snow came in mid-November. Not a light dusting, a full blizzard that dropped 3 feet in 2 days and made the road to town completely impassable. I was prepared, or thought I was. I had stocked food, had firewood stacked on the porch, had everything my grandfather's notebook said I would need. But I had not prepared for the real cold, the kind that seeps through walls and makes your bones ache and your lungs burn. By the 3rd day of the storm, I was running a fever. By the 5th day, I could barely get out of bed. The fire had gone out during the night. I had been too weak to maintain it. The cabin was freezing, and I was lying under every blanket I owned, shivering so hard my teeth hurt. I thought about Bernard, about the heated house in Connecticut, about how foolish I had been to think I could survive a Montana winter, alone at 75. I thought about dying here, in this bed, the same bed my grandfather had died in. There are worse ways to go, I told myself. There are worse places to end. And then I heard the knock. Clyde's face appeared in the doorway, red from cold, covered in snow, his expression shifting from concern to alarm. "The fire is out," he said. "I know." My voice was barely a whisper. He moved quickly. The movements of a man who had dealt with emergencies before. Within minutes, he had a fire roaring, had heated water on the wood stove, had wrapped me in additional blankets. "How bad is it?" he asked. "Fever. Cough. Started a few days ago." He pressed his hand to my forehead, his palm rough but gentle. "We need to get you to the clinic. This is more than just a cold. The road is closed. I have a snowmobile. We will go slow." I tried to protest, but I did not have the strength, and some part of me was grateful for his stubbornness. The clinic in Cedarbrook was run by a nurse practitioner named Lydia Chen. She was maybe 40, had come from Seattle 10 years ago looking for a simpler life and had never left. Her husband Robert was an art dealer who specialized in mountain craftsmanship. They had built a life here together. "Pneumonia," she said after examining me. "Caught early enough that we can treat it. But you need rest, real rest, and you cannot go back to that cabin until you are stronger. Where else am I supposed to go?" Lydia and Clyde exchanged a look. "You can stay with me," Clyde said, his voice gruff, as if embarrassed by his own generosity. "Got a spare room? It is not much, but it is warm." I started to refuse. He held up his hand. "I made a promise to your grandfather. You are not going to make me break it now." Clyde's cabin was smaller than mine, but better maintained. He had lived there for 50 years, had raised a family there. His wife had died 5 years ago. Cancer. His children had moved away to cities with more opportunity. He gave me the spare room that had once belonged to his daughter. A small space with a window that looked out at the mountains. A quilt on the bed that his wife had made. "You do not have to do this," I told him. "I know." He set a cup of tea on the nightstand. "But your grandfather would never forgive me if I let you freeze to death in his cabin. Did you know him well?" "Well enough." Clyde sat in the chair by the window. "We used to play chess sometimes. Talk about the old days. He was a private man. But when he talked about you, His face would light up. He talked about me all the time. Said he had a granddaughter back east who he had only met once. Said he could tell from looking at her that she was something special. He leaned back. Said he was saving his cabin for her, in case she ever needed somewhere to run. I looked out the window, at the snow falling steadily. I never knew. That is how Silas was. He did not talk about the things he did for people, just did them, and trusted that someday it would matter. I stayed with Clyde for 3 weeks. He was a quiet man, comfortable with silence. We would sit by his fire in the evenings, him reading, me reading my grandfather's notebooks. It was during one of those evenings that I told him about Catherine. Her name was Catherine, I said. My daughter. She had her father's eyes and my stubborn streak. She wanted to be a veterinarian. Loved animals more than anything. Clyde set down his book, listening. The leukemia took her at 19, 3 weeks from diagnosis to the end. Bernard and I held our hands together in that hospital room. It was the last time I remember us truly being united in anything. I paused. After she died, something in our marriage died too. We just did not realize it for another 30 years. Clyde nodded slowly, his eyes holding a grief that matched my own. My wife was named Margaret, most stubborn woman I ever met, most beautiful too. When the cancer came, she fought it for 2 years, longer than anyone thought possible. He looked at the fire. After she passed, I understood something. The people we love never really leave us. They just find new ways to stay. It was during my second week at Clyde's that he told me about the workshop. Your grandfather had a space in the old horse barn, he said, behind the main cabin. Used to call it his sanctuary. I know about the barn. I found some tools there. Clyde shook his head. Not the barn, under the barn. He had a whole workshop down there. Built it himself. Said it was where he kept his real work. I stared at him. Under the barn? He never told you? I barely knew him. Clyde nodded slowly. Well, when you are strong enough, maybe you should take a look. Just look for the workbench. There is a trap door underneath. 2 weeks later, I was strong enough to return to the cabin. Clyde drove me back on his snowmobile, helped me carry supplies, made sure the fire was going before he left. But I was not thinking about warmth. I was thinking about the barn. The barn was exactly as I remembered. Old wooden walls, dusty light filtering through gaps, tools on pegs, sawdust on the floor, and in the corner, a heavy workbench. It took all my strength to move it. The bench was solid oak, but inch by inch, I dragged it aside. And there in the floor beneath was a trap door. The workshop was larger than I expected. A full basement carved from the earth, lit by windows set high in the walls, dry despite the snow above, and filled with art. Wooden figures lined the walls, animals, birds, human faces, each carved with precision and beauty that took my breath away. There were furniture pieces too, chairs, tables, cabinets, each one a masterpiece. My grandfather had spent decades down here, creating, perfecting, and he had left them all, for me. Against the far wall beneath canvas, I found a final piece, a rocking chair, made from cherry wood that had aged to deep, warm red, carved with patterns of leaves and flowers and birds, and attached to the back, a small envelope. I opened it with trembling hands. This chair was meant for you, Vivian. I started it the summer you visited, finished it the year I died. I always imagined you sitting in it someday, looking out at these mountains. The rest of what I have built, you can do with as you wish. Keep it, sell it, give it away. What matters is that you know you were loved, even from far away, even by someone you barely knew. You were always loved. I sat in that rocking chair for a long time, surrounded by my grandfather's life work. I let the tears come. Not tears of grief, but tears of recognition, of finally understanding what he had tried to tell me 60 years ago. That somewhere in the world, someone had believed in me, had prepared for me, had loved me without condition, and that love had waited, patient and silent, until I was finally ready to receive it. Vivian found something precious beneath that barn, but she is about to discover that not everyone wants her to keep it. Someone is coming, someone who will try to take everything. Stay with me. And if this story has touched your heart, please subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. The lawyer arrived 3 weeks later. His name was Preston Hargrave, a man in his mid-40s with slicked back hair and a suit too expensive for Cedarbrook. He drove a black Mercedes that looked absurd parked on the dirt road. "Miss Ashford?" He smiled as he stepped out, but the smile did not reach his eyes. "It is Mrs. Ashford. What can I do for you?" He pulled a folder from his briefcase. "I represent Mountain View Development Corporation. We have been acquiring properties in this area for a planned resort project." He handed me the folder. "Unfortunately, we have discovered some irregularities with your property claim." The documents were dense with legal language, but the summary was simple. According to Preston Hargrave, my grandfather's land had never been properly surveyed after his death. The original deed was missing, the chain of ownership was unclear, and therefore the land might belong to the state of Montana, which would allow Mountain View Development to purchase it at auction. "This is ridiculous," I said. "My grandfather lived here for 40 years. Preston shrugged. "False sympathy. Property law is complicated. Without proper documentation, anyone could claim this land. I have his letter, his will. Do you have a notarized copy, filed with the county?" I did not. Preston smiled that cold smile. "You have 90 days to establish legal claim. After that, the property reverts to the state." He turned toward his Mercedes. "Think about it, Mrs. Ashford. A woman your age, alone in these mountains. It might be easier to simply accept our buyout offer." The car started, and Preston Hargrave drove away, leaving me standing with a folder of documents that threatened to take everything I had left. Opal was furious when I showed her the papers. "These vultures," she said, "they have been circling this valley for years, buying up every piece of land they can. Want to build some luxury resort? Can they actually do this?" "They can try." She scanned the documents, but Silas was meticulous about his records. He kept copies with his lawyer in Billings. His lawyer? Old man named Harold Patterson. Retired now, but his daughter took over the practice. She might still have Silas's files. The next day I called the Patterson Law Office in Billings. The daughter, Caroline Patterson, remembered my grandfather well. "Silas Ashford," she said. "Yes, my father handled his affairs for decades. I still have all his files." There was a pause. "Are you the granddaughter?" "I am. My father told me about you. Said Silas talked about you all the time. Said you would probably show up eventually." Another pause. "I will look through the files tonight. If there is anything that can help, I will find it." Caroline called back the next morning. "I have everything. Notarized deed, proper survey, filed will. Your grandfather was very thorough. He wanted to make absolutely sure no one could challenge your claim." I closed my eyes. Let the relief wash over me. "Thank you. There is more." Her voice carried excitement. "Your grandfather also left a safety deposit box. No one has opened it since he died. You are listed as the only person with access. What is in it?" "I do not know. But whatever it is, it has been waiting for you for 60 years. The trip to Billings took most of a day. Clyde insisted on driving me. Said the mountain roads were too dangerous." Caroline met us at her office, a modern building that felt disconnected from the world I had been living in. She led me to a back room with filing cabinets. "Everything my father kept on your grandfather." She pulled out a thick folder. Deeds, surveys, tax records, all properly filed. She handed it to me. "Preston Hargrave does not have a case. Your property is legally and completely yours." The safety deposit box was at a bank 2 blocks away. Small, maybe 12 inches long. The bank officer left me alone to open it. Inside I found several items. The original deed, signed and dated 1952. My grandfather's marriage certificate. A photograph of my grandmother, young and beautiful, standing in front of the cabin when it was new. And at the bottom, a smaller envelope. Inside was a letter, and clipped to it, a birth certificate. My father's birth certificate. I read the letter 3 times before the words registered. It was from my grandfather to my father, written decades ago. Never sent. Dear Samuel, I have tried to write this letter 100 times. Your mother died when you were 3. I did not know how to raise a child alone. I sent you to live with your aunt in the East because I thought she could give you a better life. By the time I realized my mistake, you were already grown, already angry, already determined to forget you ever had a father in Montana. I do not blame you for that anger. I earned it, but I want you to know that I never stopped loving you, never stopped hoping you would come back. Vivian came to visit once. Did you know that? Your wife brought her when she was 10. It was the happiest 2 weeks of my life. I am an old man now, but I am leaving everything I have to Vivian. Not because I do not love you, but because I know you do not want anything from me, and because I saw something in her eyes that summer. She will need this place someday. I do not know when. I do not know why. But she will. And when she comes, I hope she knows that she was loved. By me, by your mother, by all the Ashfords who came before. She was always loved. Your father, Silas. I did not know I was crying until tears fell onto the paper. My father had never told me about this, had never mentioned his own father except with bitterness. Now I understood. Silas had not abandoned his son. He had made a terrible, well-intentioned mistake, and he had spent the rest of his life trying to make it right. The cabin, the workshop, the furniture, the money. All of it had been his apology, his way of saying what he could not say in words. I love you. I am sorry. Please forgive me. When I returned to Cedarbrook, I was a different woman. Not different in appearance, but different inside. Something had shifted. Something had healed. I understood now why my grandfather had given me this place. It was not just about property or money. It was about redemption. His redemption. And maybe in some way, mine too. Preston Hargrave did not give up easily. He returned twice more, each time with new arguments, new threats. But now I had documentation. Now I had a lawyer. Now I had proof. And more importantly, now I had a community, because Opal had spread the word about the development company and their tactics, about the elderly woman they were trying to force off her land, and the people of Cedarbrook had responded. They showed up at my cabin, farmers, ranchers, shop owners, retirees. They brought food, offers of help, legal advice, and solidarity. This is what we do here, Opal explained as volunteers helped repair my roof. We take care of each other. Your grandfather took care of us. Now we take care of you. The final confrontation with Preston happened on a Tuesday in early March. He arrived with a full legal team, 4 lawyers in matching suits, but Caroline Patterson was there too, with all of my grandfather's documentation. And standing behind me, 30 Cedarbrook residents who had come to show support. Preston looked at the gathered crowd, at the documents, at the elderly woman who had refused to break. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he gathered his papers, signaled to his team. This is not over, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. And when he drove away, I knew he would not be back. I learned later from Opal that Preston Hargrave's career did not survive the Cedarbrook incident. Word spread about his tactics, about how he had tried to cheat an elderly woman out of her inheritance. The Montana Bar Association opened an investigation. His clients abandoned him. The last anyone heard, he had moved to another state, trying to rebuild a reputation beyond repair. Some might call that karma. I simply called it justice delayed, but not denied. Sometimes the battles we think we have to fight alone turn out to be battles entire communities are willing to fight beside us. Vivian found more than a home in Cedarbrook. She found family. But there is one more person coming, one more confrontation, and when it happens, everything will finally make sense. Spring arrives slowly in the mountains. First as a feeling, a softening of the air, a lengthening of days. Then as patches of green emerging from retreating snow. Streams beginning to run, birds returning. I had survived my first Montana winter. It had nearly killed me, but I had survived. And now, standing on my grandfather's porch on a morning in late April, watching mist rise from the valley below, I felt something I had not felt in years. Peace, not the absence of problems. I still had plenty. The cabin still needed repairs. My savings were running low. But beneath all that, something deeper had taken root. A sense of belonging, a sense of purpose, a sense that for the first time in my life, I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The word had spread about my preserves. Opal had been selling them at her store for months. The wild berry jams, the herb-infused honeys, the pickled vegetables from my grandfather's recipes, and people were buying them. Not just tourists passing through, repeat customers, people who drove hours to stock up. It had started as a way to occupy my time, but somewhere along the way, it had become something more. A business, a small one, but real. Enough to pay my bills, enough to make me feel useful, enough to give me a reason to wake up every morning. Opal helped me set up a table outside her store. Every Saturday, I would bring my jars and sit from morning until afternoon, talking to customers, sharing stories about my grandfather. The tourists loved the authenticity. The locals loved the connection to Silas, and I loved all of it. For 45 years, I had been defined by my relationship to Bernard, wife, homemaker, supporter of his career. Now I was something else entirely. I was Vivian Ashford, granddaughter of Silas, keeper of his recipes, builder of something new. And for the first time in my life, I was proud of who I was. It was a Saturday afternoon in early May when everything changed. I was sitting at my table outside Opal's store, the spring sun warm on my face, and then I looked up and saw a black sedan pulling into town. My stomach dropped because I recognized that car, and I recognized the man who stepped out. Bernard looked older than I remembered. Only 6 months had passed, but they had not been kind to him. His hair had thinned, his shoulders had stooped. The confidence that had always radiated from him seemed diminished. He walked toward me slowly, like a man approaching something he feared. "Vivian," he said. I did not stand up, did not extend my hand. "What do you want, Bernard?" He looked around, at the small town, at the mountains, at the table full of homemade preserves. "I heard you were here. Took some time to find you." "Who told you?" "A lawyer named Preston Hargrave. He contacted me about some property." Of course. Of course Preston would try one more move. If he could not intimidate me directly, he would bring in someone he thought had power over me. "What did he tell you?" "That you had inherited some land, a cabin, some artwork." He shifted his weight. He seemed to think I might have a claim to it. I stared at my husband, the man I had loved for 45 years, the man who had held my hand when Catherine died, the man who had promised me forever and then walked away with a woman young enough to be our grandchild. "You do not have a claim to anything here," I said. "This was my grandfather's property. He left it to me before we were even married." Bernard nodded slowly. "I know. I looked into it." "Then why are you here?" For a long moment, he did not answer. Then he sat down on the bench across from me, the movement heavy, defeated, because I have nowhere else to go. The story came out slowly. Serena had left him after 6 months, had found someone younger, someone with more money. The house in Connecticut had been foreclosed. Bernard had made bad investments, had taken out loans he could not repay, had watched his carefully constructed life collapse. He was broke. He was alone. And he had driven across the country thinking I might help him. I sat and listened, and when he was finished, I said the only thing I could say. "I am sorry you are struggling, Bernard." He looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. "But there is nothing for you here." "Vivian, please," his voice cracked. "I made a mistake, a terrible mistake. But we were married for 45 years. Does that not count for something?" I thought about the question, thought about all those years, all those mornings, all those dinners, all those moments when I had shaped my entire life around his needs. And I thought about the morning he had handed me those papers, the morning he had told me to find a facility, the morning he had driven away with Serena and never looked back. "Yes," I said finally. "It counted for something. It counted for exactly what you decided it was worth when you walked away." I stood up. "I spent 45 years making your life easier, raising your daughter, hosting your parties, supporting your career. And when I was no longer useful to you, you discarded me like I was nothing." Bernard opened his mouth to speak. I held up my hand. You took everything you could see, the house, the money, the car. You thought that was everything. I gestured at the mountains, at the cabin hidden in trees, at the life I had built from the ashes he had created. But you missed the one thing that mattered, the one thing that was never yours to take. What was that? I smiled. Not with anger, not with bitterness, but with something that felt remarkably like peace. Me, Bernard, you missed me. He left that afternoon. I do not know where he went. I do not know what happened to him after that. And truthfully, I did not care. Not because I hated him. I had moved past hatred months ago, but because he no longer had any power over me. His presence no longer affected my peace. His needs no longer shaped my decisions. I was free. For the first time in 45 years, I was completely free. That evening, Clyde came by with a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses. We sat on my porch as the sun set. The valley below us disappeared into shadow while the peaks still held the last of the light. "He tell you what he wanted?" Clyde asked. "Money mostly, a place to stay, a second chance." Clyde took a sip. "What did you tell him?" "I told him there was nothing here for him." "Good." We sat in silence, watching day become night. "Your grandfather would be proud of you," Clyde said finally. "You think so?" "I know so. He was always worried about you, worried that you were lost somewhere, that you needed help and he could not give it." "I did not know that." Clyde smiled, the first real smile I had seen from him. "Now he can rest. Now he knows you found your way home." "What would you have said to Bernard? Would you have forgiven him? Would you have helped him? I want to hear your thoughts in the comments, because sometimes the hardest thing in the world is not learning to survive. It is learning to let go of the people who tried to destroy us. Stay with me. This story is almost done, but the ending is the best part. Summer came to the mountains in a rush of wildflowers. The meadows exploded with color. Yellow, purple, white, red. Carpets of blossoms stretching to the horizon. I spent my days working in the garden behind the cabin, growing vegetables, tending herbs, learning the rhythms of the land my grandfather had loved. The preserves business continued to grow. Opal had set up a small website. Customers from across the country were placing orders. Nothing that would make me rich, but enough to live, enough to feel useful. The art dealer came in July, Robert Chen, Lydia's husband, a collector of folk art and handcrafted furniture. "May I see the workshop?" he asked. I led him down to the space beneath the barn, watched his face as he took in the collection. His expression told me everything. "These are extraordinary," he said. "Museum quality. I have collectors who would pay serious money." "How serious?" He walked slowly around the room, running his hands over smooth wood. "For everything? Probably 200,000. Maybe more." I steadied myself against the wall. "I am not interested in selling everything. Of course not." He turned to face me. "But if you wanted to sell a few pieces, I know exactly the right buyers." In the end, I sold 4 pieces. The rocking chair I kept. That was never for sale. That was mine. But 4 of the larger furniture pieces went to collectors in Denver and Seattle. The total came to $75,000. More money than I had ever had in my own name. Enough to repair the cabin completely. Enough to buy a reliable truck. Enough to know I could live here comfortably for the rest of my days. I used some of the money to start a class. Every Saturday afternoon, women from the surrounding area came to my cabin. Farmers' wives, retirees, young mothers looking for connection. I taught them my grandfather's recipes, showed them how to preserve the gifts of the mountain. The first Saturday, only 3 women came. Opal, Lydia, and a young mother named Beth who had driven 40 miles because she wanted to learn something real. By the 3rd month, I had 12 regular students. We would gather in my kitchen, crowded around the old wooden table my grandfather had built, learning to chop and measure and preserve. But we did more than make jam. We talked about our lives, our losses, our hopes. We laughed at our failures and celebrated our successes. We built something together that was more than just jars of preserves. We built community. And in doing so, I finally understood what my grandfather had known all along, that the real value of what we create is not in the object itself. It is in the connections we make while creating it. Clyde and I became something like family, not romantic. Neither of us was looking for that. We had both lost spouses, both made our peace with solitude, but we had our routines. Coffee on my porch every morning, chess games in the evenings. He told me about Margaret, about raising children in these mountains. I told him about Catherine, about holding her hand at the end, about the way grief had reshaped me. We understood each other in ways that did not require explanation, and that understanding became its own kind of love. It was autumn again when I found the final letter. I had been reorganizing the workshop, moving pieces around, and behind a stack of lumber, in a corner I had not yet explored, I found a small wooden box. Inside was another envelope, for Vivian, to be opened last. I took it outside, sat in my rocking chair on the porch, watched the aspens turning gold, and I opened it. My dear Vivian, if you are reading this, then you have found everything I left for you. The cabin, the land, the workshop, everything I spent my life building. But there is one more thing I need to tell you. I met you only once, that summer when you were 10 years old. But in those 2 weeks, I learned everything I needed to know about who you would become. I saw how you listened when I explained the plants, how you cared for the animals, how you sat quietly by the fire. I saw kindness in you, and curiosity, and strength. But I also saw something else, something that worried me. I saw the way your mother looked at you, with frustration, with impatience, and I saw the way you tried so hard to please her, to be perfect, to be whatever she needed you to be. I recognized that look, Vivian, because I had seen it before, in your grandmother, and in your father, and in myself. We Ashfords have a weakness. We love too much. We give too much. We shape ourselves around others until we forget who we really are. Your grandmother did it for me, and I took advantage of it without realizing. When she died, I realized too late how much I had failed her. Your father did it for everyone around him, until the effort broke him. I did not want that for you, so I made a plan. I kept this place for you, kept it separate from your life, hidden from anyone who might try to take it, because I knew that someday you would need a place where no one could reach you, a place where you could finally stop performing, stop giving, stop losing yourself in someone else's needs, a place where you could just be Vivian. I do not know what brings you here now. I do not know what you have escaped or what you have lost, but I know this. You are an Ashford, and you belong to this land. And no matter what anyone has told you, no matter how many people have tried to diminish you or discard you, you are worthy of love. You have always been worthy. You always will be. Welcome home, granddaughter, your grandfather, Silas. I sat in that rocking chair until the sun went down, until the Milky Way stretched across the sky like a river of light, until the only sound was the wind through the pines and my own steady breathing, and I understood finally what my grandfather had been trying to tell me, not just in this letter, but in everything he had left behind. The cabin was not just a building, the land was not just property, the workshop was not just art. It was all a message that had waited 60 years to be heard. You are worthy, you are loved, you belong. I am 76 years old now. It has been a year since I arrived in Montana with 2 suitcases and an old brass key. In that time, I have learned more about myself than I learned in the previous 75 years combined. I have learned that it is never too late to start over, never too late to find your purpose, never too late to discover that you are stronger than you ever knew. I have learned that family is not always about blood, that the people who show up when you need them most are the ones who matter. And I have learned that love does not always look the way we expect. Sometimes it looks like a cabin in the mountains, like a brass key kept safe for 60 years, like notebooks full of recipes and wisdom, like a rocking chair carved by hands that are now gone. Sometimes love is patient and quiet and willing to wait a lifetime to be discovered. I sit on my porch every evening now, in the rocking chair my grandfather made for me, watching the sun set behind the mountains, thinking about all the years I spent trying to be what other people needed me to be. Bernard thought he had taken everything, but he had missed the one thing that mattered. He had missed the woman I was always meant to become, the woman who could start over at 75, the woman who could build a new life from nothing, the woman who could finally, after all those years, find her way home. If you are listening to this story, I want you to know something. It is not too late for you either. Whatever you have lost, whatever has been taken from you, whatever you are running from, there is always a way forward. There is always a place where you belong. There is always someone who loves you, even if you do not know it yet. That love is waiting for you. It always has been. And somewhere out there, waiting for you to find it, is a home. Maybe it is a cabin in the mountains. Maybe it is a community of strangers who become family. Maybe it is just a quiet place inside yourself where you can finally stop performing and just be who you are. Whatever it is, it exists. And when you find it, you will know, because it will feel like coming home. Thank you for staying with me through this story. If it touched your heart, please subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And tell me in the comments, who was the person who loved you from afar? Who prepared something for you that you only discovered years later? Who believed in you even when you did not believe in yourself? Your stories matter. Your experiences matter. You matter. And wherever you are in life, whatever you are going through, remember this. It is never too late. It is never too late to find your way home. The end.